Eric Burgess here with Music Marketing TV, and today we're going to be using a chorus and some filters, and particularly the plugin Godfazer, in order to give a bass a lot more texture and just make it fit a lot nicer. A lot of the time, at least I find myself making basses that are really bright, and I'm looking for ways to rein them in without making them sound dull. Let's take a look at a quick example of what I'm talking about. All right, so I have a bass here, and the moment of interest, it's actually going on for quite a while, but there's this one moment in particular that I am extra concerned about. It's this moment. That's what it sounds like. Now, it could be great in certain circumstances, but for what I'm doing here, this is just too bright. It pops out too much. And by adding the Godfazer, we can rein it in and also get some nice like resonancy, phasery kind of textures in there, which is great. Exactly what I'm going for. Formancy, that's the word I'm looking for. So let's take a look at exactly how this thing works. Now, the processing stack's pretty important here. We're only going to look at the processing stack at Godfazer and beyond, because I'm going to sort of just assume you've got a bright sound and you've worked with it and you've brought it to a point where you're looking at ways to sort of rein it in a bit. So if we turn all of these off, that's actually the sound that I had coming in. And when I put Godfazer on, there's a noticeable difference between them. First in just stereo image, like it's a more narrow image with that one. And when we toss the Godfazer on, it gets quite a bit wider. And there is noticeably more phasing, which is exactly what we want. And what we're doing is we're preparing the signal for some pretty crazy distortion that we're going to do. So we've given it basically just some nice formancy stuff. And then we're going to run this through a distortion, in our case, a wave shaper. And this is just this shape I settled on. Sounds like this. And that just brings all these decisions that we've made with the Godfazer are being emphasized by this. This is like a magnifying glass. It takes this and makes it like way, way, way crazier. So that's what the wave shaper does. And when we go back to mess with Godfazer, we're going to do it with the wave shaper on because we want to hear what the end result will be. And then finally, there's a low pass. You don't need to worry too much about this. I'm just using this. It's actually this bottom one here. I'm using this to just control the general shape of the phrase as the music progresses. And I guess let me just play for you just a snippet here so you can hear what I mean. Let's go ahead, unmute everything, and yep, we should be good to go. Here it sounds like. So right here, I have the bass come out and be like, check this cool bass out here for a split second. That's sort of a transitional kind of a thing. So let's sort of dive into the Godfazer now. So the goal, we have something that's too bright. We want to soften it up. And I have a couple ideas. First ideas are filters. Filters are going to be key, right? Because they can take away high frequencies. The problem with using just filters is you have to follow it up with something, because then you're just missing frequency content there. And that can work for some things, but a lot of the times it just winds up sounding dull, and also it sounds static. So you're going to want to move it around and change things. That's going to be a big sort of thing that'll keep it alive and not sound dull. And the other thing is we want to sort of smear it out. And there's a couple of things that can do this sort of smearing. A phaser can do it, a chorus can do it, and a flanger can do it. And there's also some other cool plugins out there, but they're kind of mixtures of just clever ways of using phasing. So I decided to go with Godfazer because it's got a filter built in, and importantly, it's got routing options, which we're going to take a look at the different routing options here because it's actually pretty important. And then finally, it's also got phasers and choruses and all sorts of goodies in here. So we're going to use the chorus that we had before, which it's just a nice wide chorus sound. And we do not want to overdo it with the chorus. So what the chorus does is you notice the depth is up pretty high. And the reason the depth is up so high, but the speed is so low, is so this is an effect that will, let me show you with a sine wave. This would just be easier to show you with a sine wave. Okay, so I have a sine wave coming now into Godfazer. It sounds like this. And I just want to show for you a really clear example of what I mean when I say when we want smearing, we want to be careful with the speed and the depth. So the depth, actually, let me open up an EQ as well so you can see it. So there it is. There's our beautiful sine wave. Now, the depth is how much it's allowed, this sine wave is allowed to move. Since this is a chorus, it's going to move the sine wave around. And how far it can go is determined by the depth. So if we actually bring the depth way up, we see it going on quite an excursion. And if we bring it down, not so much. Now, this is still pretty close to what we had earlier. It's still a sine wave with pretty much relatively same frequency content. But if we bring the speed up, the rate at which this happens is going to go up, and it's going to sound quite a bit different. We get a much wider range, and this is going to sound quite a bit sloppier. So what I want to do with the bass sound is take advantage of a high depth with a slow speed. So coming back over to the bass sound, that is exactly why we have a slow speed in a high depth. We want to sort of move the sound around but not cause a tremendous amount of phasing. Now moving over to the filters, some pretty interesting stuff is happening that we need to be aware of. So and this is where the routing starts to become really important. So we've got a low pass and we've got a high pass. Now the low pass is going to take away high frequencies. We notice that the cutoff isn't exactly very high. And so this is our first big key is this thing's only letting just the low in through. And we have set it to be just sort of a static thing. So it's just sort of sitting where it's at, not moving. Where the high pass, it is actually letting quite a bit through. And it's being modulated by mod 2, which is an envelope follower. So it's going to follow the envelope of our sound, which for the most part is just a square wave, or a really big square. Because as soon as the sound comes in, it's going to get loud and stay there. So it's going to sort of do its thing. So this isn't going to do too much coloration, but it's going to move around and it's going to do some reduction, which will be nice for our sound in combination with the ensemble. And if we look at our routing here, we notice the ensemble feeds into the low pass only. So this is just screwing around with the low end. It completely skips the ensemble for the high pass. So this is in the two filters. This process is in parallel with this process. So this sort of makes the low end a little more like rumbly, bubbly. I'm not sure what kind of word I would use to express this. And this lets the high end through, so we still keep some of the brightness of our sound, but that is being also modulated by the volume envelope of our sound. So as soon as it gets really loud, it's going to kick in and do its job. And that is how this works. So the routing is very, very key for this. And if we play this with this routing, now if we choose a different routing setting, for example, let's just come in here. Let's just go to this one. So the ensemble on this one, what it's going to do is it's not going to do any filtering. So it's going to come through and we're going to get just the abrasiveness that we had before, which is going to defeat the point. As you can see, if we choose another one, let's go for this one. So what's going to end up happening here is we're going to get almost nothing because that low pass is pretty severe. And it's just going to low pass it and the high pass is going to do it. And all we're going to get out is just a super filtered signal. That's why that one is like not going to work. So we need to pick one that sort of does what we're looking for. And in this case, we're going for the ensemble into the filter and then letting the high one out specifically. So the choice of routing was very, very important. And you can get a preset for this. It's called background check. It's already set up and it just works really, really well with basses. So this is just kind of a breakdown of why the patch works the way it does and where I used it in my chain and why I used it and just sort of how things work. And it's just a really well designed, well thought out patch here. So there you go. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If you make some really cool bass sound with this or use it to sort of tame something that's just a little too bright, that'd be really cool if you shared it in the comments. Subscribe and have a blessed day.